Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to IT Lab's Business Reimagined event seminar. We're absolutely fortunate to have you in the room, and we're here to present to you a series of topics which features IT security, business agility, and housing, as well as whether it be data within housing. And the idea is for you to get a bit more of an informed decision or a bit of an informed insight into those various topics. Quite fortunate to have our Chief Security Officer, a chap by the name of Tino Samardjioski. Also, we're quite fortunate to have TC Gill. TC is our transformation lead, and myself, I'm an expert of housing within IT Labs. And online, we have Alex Randall. Alex is the head of sales at E.ON, and he will be presenting his insights into data and how that potentially can benefit the housing sector. So without further ado, let me hand over to TC, and TC will start his presentation to the business agility.
That's it. Thank you, John. Okay. Thank you for that introduction, John. It's great to be here talking about a subject that I'm really kind of passionate about. And as per the title, I try to have a bit of fun, try to play with it a little bit, try to make it a little bit interesting. And this is about limbering up your business, organizational yoga by TC Gill, that's me. And I'm the Agile Coach and strategist, as kind of John mentioned, at IT Labs. Now, as a joke, I was going to ask people to actually arrive in leotards and with their yoga mats and everything, make that a little bit more interesting, or even more interesting. I could have worn a leotard with my yoga mat and kind of presented that. But seriously, yoga, the reasons for yoga, the intention of yoga, the outcome of yoga conveys some great wisdom we can all learn from. It's a great analogy for me, at least, on how we can approach and care for the well-being of the systems that are our organizations. Just like a living system and other dynamic forms of life that are born to be animated, organizations are a sum of living and inanimate parts to create a life of their own. They have a sense of well-being, need, and even desires if we look deeply enough. And like any life system, without liveliness, an ability to express the life within, it will become lifeless. Fixed, rigidify, congeal, and become numb. Some might even say the organisation will fossilise. Now, who wants that? Who wants an organisation that fossilises? I don't. I don't want that for you. I don't want it for your organisation. So the idea of this talk is to maybe kind of get some inspirational thinking around how we can prevent that from happening, because all organisations do this. And also the fact that we live in a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. None of these bode well for the organisation, its people, and the customers that they yearn to serve and delight. Oh, go back. Oh, I was trying to hide that. Okay, so limbering up your business. So the wisdom contained within these slides are inspired by three arenas of the work that I am involved in. Number one, 100 plus tech leaders that we've interviewed as part of the CTO Confessions podcast, of which I currently am the host, the Chief Talking Officer, CTO with a little t. See what we did there? A play on words. Number two, the growing business agility movement, namely the Business Agility Institute, which I am a member. And number three, the amazing work that we do at IT Labs and internally in IT Labs to serve our client partners. We do a lot of work. We take a lot of the topics that are going to be covered here very seriously and bring it to life. We don't just talk the talk, we walk the walk. We'll introduce the idea of organizational constraints, visualize them, and look at how we can address and increase the flow of an organization with what you already have, okay? It's a key point there, with what you already have. You don't need to add anything, you're using the resources that you already have. Now, we're going to do a quick, sharp glimpse into some of the concepts that I think will help, and I hope to spark off some enlightening thinking, and maybe even some next step yoga moves for your organization to limber up your organization. So we're going to make this a short, timely whistle-stop tour of the concepts, so we can have conversations about them afterwards. And as we only have 20 minutes to speak, and the clock is already ticking, so I need to kind of move it on a little bit because I'm already behind. So yoga, what is yoga? Yoga is essentially a discipline focused on bringing harmony between mind and body. Mind and body harmony. Sounds cool, right? I think it sounds cool. It strikes at life in flow, movement, agility, connection, interaction, and healthy relationships, inner and outer, into the outer world. Something to aspire by. I think yoga gives us some really good pointers of how we can design and create our organizations. So you're probably thinking, what the hell has this got to do with organizations? You know, I didn't come here to do yoga and what have you, but I think it relates, you know, and I just want to throw that idea and make it interesting, right? Because if we can make transformation and the way we work with organizations interesting, we're more likely to go and do it. So how does this relate to organizations? Well, organizations, when seen as living, dynamic systems that need to be cared for and looked after, it gives us a different perspective. Yes, we do transformations. Yes, we look at increasing the performance of organizations. We have these programs to increase well-being. But do we really do enough? Okay, it always seems to be a kind of like a project which has a beginning and an end. And I don't think that should be the case. I think we can do more, and I think we can make it more fun. Just like yoga, looking after the well-being of the whole needs to be a consistent and continuous learning and doing. So I'm just going to cover the why. I think it's always good to understand the why, because as I was putting together this presentation, I kind of started thinking, well, people are going to, I know what I'm talking about, but people aren't going to understand why this is important. So let's get clear on why this is important. In a VUCA world we live in, we need to be agile in its truest sense. And when I say agile, I'm not talking about agile scrum and all that kind of stuff. I'm talking about what it says on the tin. Learning, adapting, and pivoting. So this is a lovely quote that speaks to the why. It's a definition of business agility, which is the core part of the talk that I'm doing here. So business agility can be defined as the ability to adapt to change, learn and pivot, deliver at speed, and thrive in a competitive market. Because gone are the days when big eats small. Today, fast is eating slow. The ability to learn and deliver faster than the competitors may be the only sustainable competitive advantage we have. And it's available to all of us. So the wisdom's there. We've just got to take hold of it and run with it. So how are we going to turn this into concepts that you can take away? Okay. So now we can go in lots of directions and spark up inspiration and enlighten conversations around the topic, but I'm going to throw 3 concepts into the mixing bowl. The comfortable discomfort zone. Ooh, that sounds interesting, doesn't it? It's a bit out there. Acing your organization, acing your leadership, and constraints, organizational constraints. And hopefully, I'll be able to weave these together in something we can take away with us. Now, it may appear obvious when you listen to this talk, in the talk that follows, but from what I've seen, the concepts are only organizations on an intellectual level, okay? The theory's there, but we need to bring it to life. We need to make these concepts a practice. Just like yoga, you may know the moves intellectually, like I do, and we know it's good for us, okay? But we're not practicing them. We need to bring them to life. And many of us don't do that either. We have the intellectual kind of theories in our heads, but we're not bringing it to life. They kind of sit there in our kind of internal bookshelves, and we kind of look at it and look at what I know, right? But we've got to bring it to life. So what do you need to do? So what you need to do is bring them to life, bring these concepts to life. As we talk about them, think about how you can inject some life into them, to inject life into your organization. So we want to bring the concepts to life. We want to have conversations around them, create some friction, okay? This isn't about making a happy ever after kind of situation in the organization. It's never going to go to plan. It never does, right? The world is far too complex and random. So we've got to just embrace that randomness. And we want to shake things up a little bit. So we need to stretch into the concepts to create some stretch in the organization. And talking of stretch, the first concept that I'm going to share with you gets this down to a T. So let's see what that is. Stretch, the comfortable discomfort zone. In yoga, we have to stretch. I don't know if anybody's done yoga here, but you have to stretch. It's some pretty severe stretching going on. But we need to stretch in a safe way. Stretch in a way that creates development and growth. You don't want to put your back out, you don't want to pull a muscle. So you have to be really kind of artful of how you bring that to life. The illustration tool I'm about to present to you is one that I use very often when setting up teams. I've used it in the past and I've had great effect. It's really simple. And it's a great daily reminder to all the teams. And also it's used often in my leadership training and coaching that I offer to people within IT Labs and outside the organisation. So there we go. This is where I should have done a down dog and really demonstrated my abilities. I won't do that. Just yet. Right. So the comfortable discomfort zone. Oh, wow, look at that diagram. Isn't that striking? Okay. It's a really simple diagram, which is one I draw up on the boards when I first meet teams and I meet people. And I do this with our leaders in our organisation. It's a lovely, simple diagram. You can see the comfort zone. Life is easy, comfortable. The dead zone, doing nothing, speaks for itself. And then we have the realm, this area outside here, where things go a little bit crazy and they get really, really stressful. Now, what I found in my journey in interviewing all the tech leaders in the CTO podcast, CTO Confessions and tech leaders that I've spoken to, organizations, they flip around in these zones, and it tends to be a bit of a knee-jerk, very kind of reactive. They usually go from the comfort zone, jump into the realm with some great big ideas, and then they're going to get burnt out because it's too crazy, and then they go into the dead zone, and then they slowly recover into comfort, and they go through this again and again and again. And I don't want that for organisations because it's such a shame with the good intentions that we want to transform organisations, how that opportunity is lost. So I want to point now at something there that where I think human beings thrive, which is a comfortable discomfort zone. It's just outside the comfort zone. Sounds really obvious, okay, but you have to be really explicit with people you work around or work with to kind of get that happening. The comfortable discomfort zone. Not only do people come to life here, they can sustain effort in that space. They come to life. I've seen teams, when we've made that agreement, come to life, it becomes an agreement with us. This is where people thrive. And I think human beings are evolved to live in that space. Not in the realm, not in the comfort zone, definitely not in the dead zone. When you're watching Netflix, box set number 3, in one day. It's not what you want to be doing. So this is where people thrive. And on a tribal organizational level, that's where we need to be. Okay, so as an organization, we need to be always adjusting ourselves to be here so we can create that sustainable work. In the stretch, I refer to that as the stretch. It's just enough. It's safe. Learning, adapting, experimenting. And the side effects of the organization are the people and the teams become fully animated. They come to life. I've seen it with teams, and it's amazing to watch. And from a leadership perspective, I've been able to walk away from teams and they stay animated. They stay alive. So it almost becomes like a game, to stay in that comfort zone because everybody's calling each other out. Fun even, fulfilling for sure. So it's simple. Design an agreement with your people to work in this zone, okay? Make it explicit. Don't assume anything. Always make things explicit with your people and design it and have conversations around that. Get them to call each other out. Call the leadership out. When I design this with teams, I get them to call me out. If I ever end up in the realm, comfort zone, the dead zone, it happens sometimes, I get people to call me out. It's a simple and effective practice for individuals and groups. I draw this up on walls in the office, and it really does work. So, the comfortable discomfort zone, simple concept that we can bring to life in organizations. The next concept is ACing. Concept number 2, is something that I always do when coaching leaders. In the context of yoga, it's stretching the leadership and action in the organization. It's a staple work within IT Labs. We do this. We use this tool a lot. to invigorate the leadership and create true leaders within the organization. This is what I think great leaders do, cyclically. They just keep going around the circle again and again. And that leadership then creates impact. It's a simple tool with easy steps to pick up and run with, okay? It's not a complex idea. It's simple. You can just run with that. Just remember the ACE the situation. So let's start, okay? You've got awareness, communication, engagement. That's what ACE stands for. Awareness. Raise your awareness. From a personal and organizational development level, everything comes from awareness. That's where it starts. You have to bring your awareness to the highest level you can get it to. Turn it up, pump it up. And then say to yourself, what am I noticing? What's here? What's on my radar? Okay, look at what's on your radar. Now, the interesting thing is that awareness tends to work for everybody, and it works in organizations. People are aware of what's happening. Where it goes wrong, invariably, is this little baby here, communication. People do not communicate what they are aware of. This is a common failure of leadership, a common failure in organizations. So you have to really work at it. You have to really stretch into that. I often joke with leaders to actually sit down and have a conversation with themselves about what they're aware of. Me personally, I journal on what I'm aware of. I need to talk it through. I need to talk to myself. Talking to yourself is a perfectly healthy thing to do. Isn't that right, Tees? Yes, it is. So, you know, it's amazing what comes up when you have that conversation, especially when you're inking your thinking on paper. And if you can do this in a group as well, have that communication as a group, it's amazing what you unpack. You suddenly see the blind spots, you see conversations come up, and you start to realize what you've been missing. And it was staring you right in the face, just like an elephant in the room. You spot it. And then finally, we've got our awareness, we've got our communication, engagement. Once we communicate that awareness, we have to make a conscious choice. And that can include to do nothing, but it has to be a conscious choice. We have to be very explicit on what we are deciding. And of course, communicating that decision and that choice out as well. And then we repeat and we go around again. So that's acing, okay? You can ace the organization, you can ace your leadership, you can ace your personal development. Works everywhere. The stretch occurs at many levels of the organization when you bring this in. Training your workers to employ this simple trick can create leaders of everyone. I mean, just imagine that, an organization full to the brim with leaders. Everyone's a leader. In fact, this feeds into the 5 dimensions of leadership, which is the subject of another talk. I couldn't squeeze it into this one because it's not enough time. But in short, everyone is a leader in an organization, and you just need to fire that up. We just need to see leadership in its different facets that suit different people, and that's what the 5 dimensions of leadership is about. So acing your organization increases awareness, conversations, and action. A simple step to create more learning and liveliness in your organizations. Putting organizations and all its parts, its people, into the comfortable discomfort zone that we just saw a second ago. Acing makes uncomfortable situations, and we have to deal with it. A great continuous moment-to-moment tool to create stretch in the organization. And this can be applied beautifully to the next concept that I'm about to share with you, which is, I don't know if anybody can remember what the next one was. Constraints, organizational constraints. Now, this concept hopefully invites you to get a little bit more laser focused on the areas that you need to work on in your business right now, okay? With the aim of getting the biggest, best, effective outcome of flow, harmony, and agility in your organization. Right, here is an extremely, crazily idealistic representation of an organization. There are no constraints and flow isn't hindered, smooth, okay, beautiful. This is a dream state for an organization. You've got your market demands over there, the market demands. Stuff happens in the organization, we deliver value to the market. And as it goes through the different functions, they all function elegantly and pass over. There's no hindrances, there's no kind of hold-ups and what have you, there's no backing up. Wouldn't that be a dream? Flow. Happy days. I think that's beautiful. The reality. Yuck. The widening and narrowing of the organizational functions here, represented here, are a crude representation of the agility and flow in that particular area. They are constraints. And in short, in the context of agility, an organization can only be as agile as its least agile division. The least agile division stops the flow and things back up, it goes horribly wrong. And you get lots of noise in the organization and you lose clarity and it goes on from there. And I have to give credit to Evan Laybourne, the founder of the Business Agility Institute, for this diagram, for the inspiration of this diagram and the quote that I kind of referenced there. Now, IT and software development used to be one of these constraints. Okay? It used to be one of these constraints. As companies started to weave themselves into the digital fabric of the kind of modern day world, of business world, it became a constraint in organizations, more so for companies that were actually delivering software to the market themselves. And these constraints make life flow and adaptability of the organization absolutely painful. It's suffocating, in fact. I've worked in organizations previous to IT Labs where this was the case, and you'll be surprised at how often this happens. And it's horrible, you know. I don't know if you can feel it, you've experienced this, but can you feel the pain, you know, of working in an organization? Like, you know what you want to do, but you just can't do it. So lots of innovation occurred for software to increase the throughput through its constraint and to kind of improve the adaptability of the organization. And this is where the ideas and new methodologies, new philosophies of work kind of came in. For example, Agile, the Agile mindset, and numerous other methodologies that kind of came to life to bring that to life. For example, like Agile Scrum and DevOps. They've done a great job in actually getting rid of that constraint. So, in this diagram, you can see, in fact, IT software development is no longer the bottleneck. Other parts of the organization have become the constraints. And there will always be constraints in the organization. You don't live in a perfect world, so there will always be constraints. But the fact is that IT software development deployment is not the problem anymore, especially in adapting and being agile to changes in the markets over here. Okay, we can deliver stuff, but we're not adapting to what's happening over there. The widening of these bottlenecks has brought about, for software development, the widening of these bottlenecks has brought about creating flow and harmony in the organization. By looking at what the interactions with the development kind of function of the organization. The constraint loosened, the flow increased, and the agility improved the ability to change and adapt to new information, new learning, and changing requirements. And as you can see, other parts of the organizations are now holding it up. So we do the work, okay? Acing the constraints and getting uncomfortable. We start to widen the flow and agility of the organization. For example, in HR, in operations, sales, marketing, okay? We're looking to widen those constraints. And it's a continuous thing. We stretch and we re-stretch and we practice organizational yoga moves to widen and improve the throughput. Creating a learning organization, learning about itself, living and breathing, and it's adaptive. It's an adaptive organization full of life. The actual fact that we're having conversations about these constraints brings the organization to life. People start to understand where they are in the organization. We start to see where improvements can be made, where money can be saved. So the organization, as we widen those constraints, starts to become fully moving and healthy, I believe. And if you want to know more about the theory of constraints, I recommend this book, The Goal. I don't know, has anyone read that in here? Anyone? It's a really, really good book, really interesting story put together. And I'm going to try and pronounce the author's name, E.ON Goldratt, or Mr. Goldratt, as I like to call him. He's done some great stuff on theory of constraints. And Evan has written a really good article on Evan's theory of agile constraints, which is an inspiration for this talk here. And if you want to know the links for that, please let me know and I'll send it personally to you. It's a really good read, really simple. So, bringing it back to yoga. I've only got a few more minutes, so don't worry. Just hang in there with me. So organizational yoga. So this is a definition of yoga from an organizational perspective that I put together. Organizational yoga is essentially a discipline of focused stretching on all aspects of business to bring flow, life and movement, agility, into the organisation, from the thinking to the doing, and in the direction of what we need to do to delight our customers and the market needs quickly. Okay. So bringing it together, hopefully you've got some interesting ideas around how you can bring this to life. They're really simple concepts to bring to life. There are many ways we can do the stretch in the organisations. These that I shared with you just a minute ago are the ones that have worked for me. They're simple to create the conditions for liveliness and well-being in the organisation. They're really simple, and you can start today if you're going back to work today. So set up your culture to understand the comfortable discomfort zone and urge everyone to get into that zone and to call each other out to be in that zone, okay? Don't allow this other stuff to go on because it's not good for anybody, right? Human beings don't thrive in those spaces. Ace your leadership, ace your organisation, ace at different levels of the organisation. That works on every single layer of the organisation, down to the individual. And constraints. Look at the constraints in your organisation, sniff them out. They're in your organisation, and we just need to get really, really clear on them. Ace them. Bring the ace to the constraints. So, I want to finish now on a nice quote on the topic that's very close to my heart and very close to IT Lab's heart. It's about human-centric organisations with a business mindset. The Agile movement in software is part of a larger movement towards more humane and dynamic workplaces in the 21st century by Mr. Bunning here. Okay, great quote. Agile is yoga for the software teams. Business agility is yoga for the wider and the whole organisation. So let's do more yoga in our companies. That's the end of my talk. Thank you very much for listening. Oh yes, sorry, I thought I got away with it then. Any questions? Go on, give me a top one.
Check also if there is online questions, but I cannot see the chat list.
So do we have any questions? Does that make sense?
I've got a question.
Go on.
So with regards to your ACE,
Yeah.
where have you seen that implemented, and what would you suggest with regards to the size of the organisation? Will it be a small business, medium-sized business, and enterprise?
Good question. It's that kind of scaling. For me, I mean, I take it from an individual level, you know, so I ace situations. You know. Sorry, I do apologise. Thank you for calling out. Sorry, I walked away from you. So from a scaling perspective, I think it works at every organisation. It's in every room. It's in every meeting. Okay, you just got to call it out. I mean, one of the things I find interesting, you know, when you're in a meeting room and somebody's not saying something, and my awareness is firing up, it's kind of telling me something's not right here. There's a big elephant in the room and nobody's pointing at it. Just call it out. Communicate it in an appropriate and timely manner. I don't know if anyone else noticed, but this doesn't look right. I don't know if anyone's noticed, but this isn't going to work, right? And then you can have a conversation. It gets messy, but this is what human beings are good at. We thrive in organic, messy situations. I think organisations are always hell-bent on trying to align and order and process things up. It doesn't work, right? We've got to allow messiness into the process because that's human. That's nature. And we just got to allow it to. So, in short, so I was going to go off on a tangent there, but bring it to life. Bring ACE into every situation in a meeting room, in a conversation by the water bottle, you know, in the kind of kitchen area. Just ace every situation. It's really good. And it's a really good leadership tool as well. So if you're in a really tough situation, right, don't make it emotional, which is quite funny because sometimes I do get very emotional. But just declare what you're aware of. I'm noticing this is not working and I'm really upset about it, or I don't think this is going to work correctly. And then once it's in the space, it will create an impact and it will create ricochets or movements, you know, kind of thing, and get messy. But that's what we're in there for. We're there to say these things and make the organisation work better. So we've got to get brave, you know, we've got to get that spirit up and get vigorous in sharing what our awareness is doing. So thank you. Great question. Hopefully that answers.
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Based on your conversations you've had with CTO confessions, have you noticed a trend in where constraints normally happen within companies?
Yes, I have. I mean, I think it depends really. I mean, every organisation has its own signature. I know, for example, between the creating the software and deployment, sometimes that's the tricky one. DevOps is figuring that one out. There's a lot of organisations there that actually haven't bringing DevOps fully into the mix, and that's an opportunity for the organisation to really get that flow going. So we described a very kind of classical, very idealistic view here of software development, delivering software. But I think that's still an opportunity. There's a lot of organisations that don't do that very well. I've met organisations that do it really well. It's almost out of the box, and that's brilliant. I've worked on projects as well, because I used to be a software engineer, an electronic engineer. And we had systems where it would do the regression testing, automated testing, and then there would be some manual testing done. And literally, you wake up in the morning and it was ready to deploy. I mean, how brilliant is that? You wake up to a new software release, and it's possible. I've spoken to leaders that do this. I've worked on projects that do this, so it is very possible. But you just got to invest the time. You've got to look at that constraint and going, damn it, I'm not going to have that constraint. I need to kick that one out of the park. So, good question. Thank you for saying that. One more question.
So you mentioned that you worked with organizations in the past where they were just firing right away. Was that a function of the management team actually knowing to implement this right away, or was it a function of them just working well together?
When things were going smoothly?
Yeah.
I think it's a number of things. It's a combination of processes. It's a combination of systems that we have within our organizations, and it's a combination of the social system. So for me, there's a mixture of things going on here. For me, the organisation is made up of three systems, okay? One is the financial system. We need to survive. The company needs to survive. It has to survive. Financial system, absolutely important. The second one is the operational system. How do we do stuff? How do we deliver it? And then the one that seems to get forgotten, or is kind of left to some people that are really interested, is the social system. And this is a connection between you, me, the conversations that we have. And I don't think we invest in that enough, having those moments where we don't talk about work and we get to know each other. People say, well, what's that got to do with work? It's got everything to do with work. Companies are a bag of human beings, right? It's a collection of human beings, and we need to create the connection between them. And even though the conversations might not be relevant to the business directly, those connections feed out into the wider organisation. So I've seen it where people do invest in the social system. I think a lot of people are starting to try this. They're adapting to the situation we are. Working remotely, people are getting very innovative of how we do create that connectivity and that social system, make it healthy, inject it. I mean, as you can tell, I love injecting into social systems, and I just want other leaders to do that as well. Because it's fun. You'll come to life as leaders, people come to life, and we all do well. Happy days. Thank you for that question. Oh, we've got another one.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm on a roll.
Is Agile always the best way forward?
It's a good one. So the problem with Agile is that it's become a little bit of a thing that we always run to. It's the thing that we run to. And I don't think it's always the right way. It's a way, and it's an approach you can take, but it isn't the way. Because otherwise, it's a cult, okay? We're following it blindly. I think it gives a lot, because I've worked in Agile teams and I've seen the impact that Agile has when you do authentic Agile. Don't get me wrong here. There are examples of Agile where it's absolutely not good. It's destroyed it. I've seen people hate it. And it's not about hating it. People should be enjoying that. And that's where you need to really kind of listen to the space. So in answer to the question, I don't think Agile is always the way, but there's lots of ways to do so. Me personally, I just like to get into a space, maybe take some wisdom from other methodologies and principles and philosophies, and then add my mix to it, make it up, mix it up. All that matters is that we're getting the outcome, right? Which is happy people, great deliveries, efficient work, looking at the constraints, being aware of what's in the organisation, acing the organisation, and being a little bit uncomfortable, okay? I think that's what it's about. And no, Agile can offer that, but it's not the answer. It's not always the answer.
Yeah, which means that we have to have a conference in which we review the process of selecting which operations should be Agile and which one.
Yes.
For the time being should stay as they are.
That's right. I think Agile is always seen as this thing on the box that you pick up and then you go, there you go, plug it into the organisation, it's going to do it. It's not. is that Agile is really simple principle. The 4 values and 12 principles are really simple on paper. But people then pick up the methodology, the practices, so to bring it to life as like a pill. And it's not a pill. It's actually really hard to bring it to life. But that's the fun part of it. How do we bring this to life? How do we make it work? So we have to really think about it. We can't just pick it up off the shelf and run with it. It doesn't work like that. And the Agile teams that I've worked with, where Agile has been implemented, actually they've made it their own. They've taken some of the wisdom, applied it, and made it work. So I'm probably going to get shot by strategists out right now. They're probably all banging away on the things saying, TC, oh my God, I'm never talking to you again. So that's it. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah.
And I think I'm going to get kicked off stage in a minute. And before I get kicked off, does anybody else have any questions? Go on, you can kick me off now. All right. Thank you very much for your questions. I've really enjoyed that. Thank you.
Thank you, TC. That was a very, very informative presentation, and I'm sure everyone got some value from that, so thank you. Next, I'd like to welcome Tino. Tino is a security officer, and Tino will be providing you some insights with regards to IT security and some insights in that environment. So let me hand over to TC. Tino.
Thank you, man. Thank you, TC. It was a wonderful presentation. I will have to do my best to follow you up. Okay, so as John introduced me, I'm Tino Samardjioski. I'm a security officer in IT Labs. I have 10-year experience in cybersecurity, information security, and data protection. So today we'll talk about different type of challenges and risks that we face every day in our corporate infrastructure. This is the agenda for today. We'll speak about difference between information security and cybersecurity, about the challenges and risks in corporate security, about digital twins and threats which are affecting them, tools which can help us to improve cybersecurity hygiene, cybersecurity culture, how should we improve that, and also something about secure system architecture and engineering principles. So first, the difference between information security and cybersecurity. Information security is defined as the protection of information and information systems against unauthorized access, modification, disclosure, in order to provide confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And cybersecurity is more about protecting the networks itself, the devices from the same attacks. But information security is a bit a broader approach where everything that is available for one organization or company is an asset, should be also under that kind of protection. So you can, from the picture, you can see how is the reality. Before a data breach, the security budget is very low, and after a data breach, it goes to a level where maybe it needs to be before. Some of the actual current and maybe new challenges and risks that came up from this kind of hybrid working, because now most of the companies and employees are still working from their homes, from their public maybe places, so they're using different types of infrastructure in order to access to the corporate systems and services. So some of those risks are the bring your own device policies, which should help us to manage not only the corporate devices, but also the personal devices, because now we are letting also the employees to use their personal devices to access the corporate infrastructure, such as the laptops, smartphones, and tablets. And we have to be sure that those devices are compliant with our security policies. For example, they need to have disk encryption, latest operative system, latest security updates, antivirus, etc. Next are the IoT devices. A big challenge here is to have clear visibility of all of the IoT devices in the corporate network, because we are using a lot of devices such as air conditioning or other things that now are connected to the internet, and we have to be careful how those devices are configured and from security aspect. The remote working, as I mentioned, is also a challenge, because we are never sure of how employees are connecting from their home routers, or they're using some public access networks, so they can access to their corporate infrastructure. That's why we need to implement other protective technical and organizational measures, which could help us to detect any unsecure connection or any malicious behavior from those devices or from those connections. Ransomware, it's an old friend, I would say. It's still a big challenge, because the attackers are gaining to gain access to our data and to encrypt it so they can extort money afterwards. And here I would say that the best approach is to have frequent and proper backup of our data. And I think it's the best solution to bring the data in life. So next is phishing, also an old friend, but still it's actual, it's current, and it's the most efficient way to lure us to so the attackers can gain some information how to access to our maybe device or systems, or to our account, to compromise our account, and afterwards they can do other malicious activities from there. Also, we have to be careful from the vulnerabilities in the supply chains, because we are using different types of cloud applications and systems, which can be part of this kind of supply chain attacks. So we have to implement tools that can help us to detect this kind of risks. Okay, next slide is about digital twins. Digital twins, as we know, is a virtual digital representation of a real physical system integrated with several other technologies, such as the artificial intelligence, the IoT, the machine learning, the data mining, and cloud computing. So different type of threats can affect the digital twin security. The threats can be affected to their confidentiality, integrity, and availability. They can relate to the attack surface and also to the real-time data usage. Different categories of threats are existing. So the physical threats can arise from interactions with the physical components. Also, the IoT devices can be damaged and be destroyed or even stolen. And safety first, because safety is a different topic than security, meaning that the device should not affect health or any injuries physically. Data modification threats. The data can be modified at the source, so we need devices to be tamper-proofed and tamper-resistant to protect the data from modification. And we have also the data poisoning attacks. The system attacks are the exploitation of the vulnerabilities in the operative systems. And also here is the ransomware attack. From software threats, we have the software source code, because It's the attack that could be copied by, there is insider threat, so it could be copied and leaked from inside. Poor coding could cause weak software protection. Also, weak or no software protection could lead to reverse engineering, so the attackers can gain access with this kind of techniques. And also, unauthorized access can threat to intellectual property and trade secrets. Data communication threats, we have man-in-the-middle attacks, DDoS attacks, so we face the availability of the devices, the usage, eavesdropping, spoofing, or replay attacks. In data storing threats category, the stored data is very sensitive and could be leaked to exposed to many risks. It could be leaked to the public intentionally or unintentionally, and also here the trust concerns and privacy issues related to the public cloud. The last are the machine learning threats. So the machine learning processes are vulnerable to security and privacy attacks, and it could also decrease in performance and reliability of the system. Some of the tools that could help us to improve the cybersecurity hygiene. So we have example of tools for asset discovery, which could help us to have full visibility of all the devices within one IT network, one IT environment. And also it could help us if a rogue device is also connected to that environment, we could be able to detect that and prevent it from doing anything malicious. MDM or MAM, mobile device management or mobile application management. It's a tool that supports a diverse mobile environment and could manage all types of devices securely, and also could help us to enforce policies to ensure that the devices and applications are compliant with our security requirements. The biggest risks that is mitigated with this kind of tools are when a device is stolen or maybe lost. So it could help us to remotely wipe the data which is on it, so we can mitigate the risk from that data being compromised. Also, here a lot of policies can be set, different security policies, which could give us clear configuration of the devices and applications that are used in our environment, such as the hardening of the device, the security of the account itself, the antivirus, the security updates, and everything else. Log management system or CM system, it's a tool that can collect, aggregate, and detect any kind of any real data logs from all sources. And we can set different policies which could, and rules which could alert us if anything abnormal happens. So we've been able to handle them properly and in timely manner. The vulnerability scanner, it's a tool which can help us to assess the whole IT environment from vulnerabilities. So we can scan, we can start to scan different type of devices, network devices, also servers, endpoints. So we can have a clear picture of the security risks that are on those devices or systems. And also it gives us mitigations actions such as patches or workarounds, how to properly configure those systems to mitigate the risks. The table is about the digital twin threats and the countermeasures that can be taken in order to mitigate those threats. So within the physical threats, we have the physical security. The data modification threats, we have tamper-proof and tamper-resistant hardware as a countermeasure. The software threats, we're covering with the software hardening, secure software lifecycle development, security testing. The data communication threats, we have the network resiliency, the cryptographic solution, firewalls, intrusion detection systems. The system threats can be also covered with firewalls, access controls, intrusion detection systems, anti-malware or system hardening. Data storing threats with cryptographic solutions and machine learning threats with data sanitization, algorithm robustness, enhancement, and security assessment. Next is the cybersecurity culture. So why is this important and how can we improve the cybersecurity culture in one company? I would say that no matter how many and how much security tools or softwares we are implementing in our company, it's the employees who are in the front row to face the attacks. So those are very important in the layered security in one company. Information security is everyone's responsibility, so not only the security officer, but every employee in the company. The first objective of a security-aware employee is to be able to recognize a security threat and to report it so the security team can handle that in a proper and timely manner. And nowadays, any organization or individual is liable to be a victim of hackers. So they're not choosing, they're just attacking, and should be able to defend. We have some quotes here, so even the most experienced professionals sometimes get security wrong. Humans are creatures of habits. There's always somebody waiting to use that. And as I said, the weakest link in information security are the people being unaware. So what could we do to improve our security culture and with that our cybersecurity posture of our company? This is a must, I think, the Information Security Awareness Program, where every new employee and every current employee at least once a year, will have training for security, and we will evaluate his knowledge through a quiz of questions. So we should be able to know his level of knowledge within cybersecurity. Also, we can introduce tailored trainings based on the department business processes. For example, tailored training for HR, for marketing team, for finance team, for developers. So we can have tailored trainings just for them. Security champions, we can introduce that as roles to our employees. So once we evaluate, let's say in a year, all of the employees, we can set different rules based on how they did go on the quiz, or they maybe reported the most security incident in 1 year. Based on those factors, we can introduce this kind of role like security champion and maybe have a reward program or anything like that. Also, we can introduce games so they can learn from games about security. And we can use short focused videos with examples of real incidents so they can learn also from that one, so we can prevent such in the future. The last slide is about the secure system architecture. and the engineering principles. So what should secure system engineering techniques cover? When one system is introduced in an organization or a company, there are different security principles or approaches that could be taken into consideration, such as the security by design, defensive depth, fail securely, distrust input from external applications, assume breach, least privilege, usability and manageability, and least functionality. Other technique that should be considered is, we already mentioned, to scan and to detect the information security vulnerabilities that are at the moment on those systems. So before going to maybe being published on the internet or to production, to be able to prevent any kind of risks and to mitigate them. The last is the system hardening, where we take policies, best practices policies, in order to properly configure those systems, so not to have default settings which could lead to some kind of exploit in the future. Other criteria that should be considered when designing secure engineering principles is the need to integrate these controls with specific security architecture. Also should be used the existing technical security infrastructure, such as the public key infrastructure, identity management, or data leakage prevention solutions. Another criteria to be taken is whether the organization is capable of building and maintaining the selected technology, and of course the cost and time required to satisfy all the security requirements and complexity of such requirements. And the last one would be always to use the existing best security practices. So yeah, that's it from my side. If there are any questions you want to ask, I will be happy to answer. Let's see if we have also on the online. Zoltan?
Yeah, it's interesting. In terms of security, do you see different threats from various different industries? You talked a lot, you made a lot of general statements about what could be done to secure an organization, but are there different threats, say, from a tech company to a gaming company to a real estate company?
Of course, there are. I have experience working in different companies, such as telecommunication company, bank company, IT company now. So yeah, there are a lot of different attacks, a lot of different threats. So that's why I said information security is a broader aspect. It's not only cybersecurity, like protecting the network and the devices, but could also affect other things such as communication channels. Everything that is available for that company could be attacked. And that's why we need a bigger approach when taking risk analysis, when implementing risk analysis and cybersecurity practices. Thank you for the question.
Do you have any examples of gaming for improving culture? You mentioned gaming on the slide.
Yes. I've never tried to introduce in one company, but I have examples that I've been searching. So there are like cards with with security roles, and they have different tasks. So the game is like playing with the cards, and they learn from that game what are the threats and how can they handle them when they see them, and how should they respond to them, so they can be able to prevent such kind of scenarios.
I've heard of another one that at night after everybody goes home, they come in and evaluate what's going on, what people are leaving on their desks, maybe taking pictures and wall of shame.
Yeah, that's a great example.
Or job well done, the next day you see a sticker.
Yeah, I know that one. Yeah, that's great practice where the awareness of the employees is raised by that action. So yeah, once they're leaving the company, you should go on a check and see if maybe anyone leave the documents on his desks, or he didn't lock his computer or something like that. So you can put a sticker where you should have his awareness raised that he's done something wrong and that should be improved.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
This one thing you mentioned about inside this company software code. How do you stop that? So we've got investors access to the code.
Yeah, the one thing, I think the first thing and most important things is to have non-disclosure agreements with every employee. Like in their job agreements, there should be non-disclosure terms where he should be aware that if he do something like that, that he will be liable for that in court. And the next, that's an organizational measure, I would say. The technical measure are the data leakage protection, where you're able with those kind of tools to set rules on different channels like email. You should also protect from uploading to the cloud, let's say to Dropbox or any other public available solutions. And you're able to detect that and to prevent it.
Another interesting thing that's happening in that area is employees signing personal liability up to a certain amount for the delivery of that value that they deliver. So if you can put a price tag on a code or a delivery that they deliver and you make them liable, then the awareness is far higher. And it's becoming an acceptable practice these days because of the cyber security state that's happening in a lot of organizations. So, but if somebody wants to, I mean, it's, as we know, 90% of breaches are human factors. So working with humans, the tech aside, that's obviously we know best practices there. Sometimes it's political, sometimes it's budgetary constraints, but the human factor needs to be really, really a top priority from an education, from an awareness, and from a legal standpoint.
And when it comes to source code verification, there are a lot of tools which are helping first to potentially indicate that there is a source code still falling somewhere, because you may utilize open source code into the code which is proprietary and you might not be allowed. So there are tools which are analyzing the code and detecting potential pieces of code which are taken out anywhere else, especially from open sources which are available. There are also tools doing static and dynamic analysis to see if the code is not done properly. So you are maybe not taking care about all the measures which are predefined. And a lot of code, if it's by the humans, by the people, by the team, which are too focused on analyzing how the implementation is done. Because in my experience, so far the algorithms are not broken by anything, but the implementation itself is not broken. Either the developers are lazy to implement the things the right way, or maybe they are not aware about it.
I've got a question. You didn't actually, I just cover SOC or having like a managed SOC service, because a lot of things you spoke about, they're really good, but can be really expensive.
Yes.
And I guess what's your take on having potentially a managed SOC service or being able to embed that within an organization?
Yeah, it's quite challenging because all of these tools I mentioned, they should be, let's say, in one environment, and you have to have people which will monitor this kind of alerts and abnormal behavior in order to be able to respond to such kind of attacks. So yeah, that could be a starting point for a security operations center where you're receiving abnormal alerts for abnormal behavior from all of these attacks and devices. So you should be able to prevent any malicious attacks.
Do you guys have a certain model or?
Soon to be.
We're in a phase where
It's in the works.
internally, yes. Yeah, so we are learning because it's a lot of effort. There are a lot of tools that can be used. So yeah, it's an ongoing things, and I think it will be soon enough to have it prepared.
Some tools can be cheaper with a SOC, but some you kind of need to have them on your own. But it's a longer conversation that we can fully get into in depth. We are prepping a SOC service.
Yeah, because obviously using like services with what AWS or so, they have a lot of built-in features, but again, you have to know how to use them, to utilize them. Otherwise, it doesn't matter.
Of course. If you're overwhelmed with alerts and you cannot handle them at once, yeah, it's a big issue. You should fine-tuning them to have real alerts from real scenarios, so you can be able to prevent any malicious activity.
Also, what's important is the level of support, L1, L2. So would it be, or third party, but what support would you provide to that environment?
Just one more question from the audience, but I think we already covered it because it's saying, according to your experience, which is the best method for you for raising security awareness at workplace among colleagues? So from my point of view, I as a security officer, because I go at the office right now, I'm not working from home anymore. I always try to give my best to share my knowledge, and when I see something wrong, I'm always telling them. So I'm actually like the police officer at work sometimes. But yeah, I try to raise the awareness by telling them what's right, what's wrong, and what are the risks that could happen if something is wrong. And that's my position.
I just want to add to that, because I think that's really interesting to take this. You see the human being, I don't want to make your life harder. You've got a job to do. How can I help you? Kind of thing, or how can you help me? Yeah, I'm sure if you came over to me and worked and said, TC, that thing that you do really doesn't make me feel comfortable. I'm probably flexible with human.
Yeah, for example, I have colleagues who still leave the laptop not locked when they leave the desk. And I go to the laptop and I connect to the Teams general chat and I write something like which is not for the group, and they will see when they come, so they feel wrong about it. So.
Or you just install a virus on it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm telling them that I took their computer for mining bitcoins or anything, so yeah. I'm doing stuff like that, so I could raise the awareness. Yeah.
Next time maybe you can change the background picture to something.
Yeah, there are different scenarios. Bring it. Bring the ideas. Thank you.
One thing that we have been also practicing is we throw a USB drive on the floor, which is malicious and does something stupid. And the USB stick is reverting a specific message to us to monitor the behavior of the people. And usually, we educate them that when we find a USB stick, we just support what the human behavior is. Let's see what's inside. And speaking of that, the stupid things happen.
Yeah, that's a very good one.
No shortage of ideas.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so good afternoon. I hope you've all had, an interesting afternoon listening to a number of discussions, business agility, IT security. Now it's my turn. I'm John Abadom, and I am the General Manager for IT Labs Limited in the UK. And I'm here to present to you a number of key housing technology signposts that we would like to make you aware of, especially some of our audience who are in the housing sector. So to begin, I am going to talk through whether it be some key facts within the housing sector. I'm then going to look at providing you some signposts with regards to some critical dates that are coming up between now and 2050. And then I'm going to provide you with some examples, some demos of what we've done looking at BIM environments and asset management platforms for you to review. And most importantly, which I'll come through early on in my presentation, why is this all important? And I think the big why is a key factor. So let's begin. So currently in the UK, there are 4 million households who are renting within the social housing sector. 10% of those are renting from housing associations and 7% are from local authorities. Excuse me. Excellent. So why is this important? Well, at the moment, there is a current housing shortage. So currently, we are roughly building 250,000 homes a year. If that, the anticipated target should be 300,000 homes, and we're nowhere near that. So there's a massive issue there. Also, sustainability is a massive factor, and that's been addressed with regards to environment, social, and governance, that ESG, and that requires a number of retrofits across the current stock in the UK, and also there's a need to carry out a number of stock swaps. That looks at where local authorities are swapping properties with housing associations, etc. So this is an environment that looks at an ecosystem for the private vet sector. As you can see here, 17% are families who get by and living over accommodation. 3% are older renters, so these are, as an example, 65 to over 65 years old in terms of their accommodation, and that's 1 in 9. You've got struggling families who are typically single parents and they have dependent children, and vulnerable singles are individuals who are in low-paid work and they don't save, and that's a key factor. So this is an example of landlords within the social housing sector who are providing or an indication of good practice, compliance, mixed compliance, low compliance, and meeting legal requirements. What we mean by that is, as an example, 30% know their stock. They've got absolute detail and data on their stock. They know what's happening in their environment. I'm not saying that the rest do not, but they've got a very, very good understanding. Mixed compliance looks at, as an example, 24% who are carrying out the necessary assessments that they could do more. 11% looks at, as an example, environments which have, or landlords who in essence, could improve their environment by having a better grip on, say, for example, knowledge of their stock, etc. 35%, these are individuals who are meeting legal requirements, they've got a good understanding of their stock, and most importantly, they've got a good understanding as to what are the future legislation that's coming into play. So why is this important? And for me, I class this as the watershed. And what I mean by this can never happen again. We'll see why. So an electrical fault on a fridge started a fire back in September 14th, 2017, around about 1 o'clock in the morning on the 4th floor at Grenfell Tower. The challenge was that within that particular apartment, they fitted some windows which were not the right spec. This led to fly escaping, climbing up the cladding, and then coming back down into the building. The challenge was that when it came back down into the building, obviously the residents ran out of their apartments. The problem was that the doors in those environments were not automatically closing, and that was the big issue. It was not automatic closing. Yes, the sprinklers weren't working. There's a lot of smoke, a lot of fire that went into the hallway, and that also caused a problem. And also the stay put policy was a massive factor. So there was a number of factors there that led to, unfortunately, a significant number of people that passed who should not have passed. And this can never happen again. And this is why IT Labs is passionate, absolutely passionate about making sure this doesn't happen again with the technology that we have. This is an example of a letter that was sent by a resident. And in essence, I won't go through the letter, but this letter depicts a scenario where the resident has an issue with their apartment. They've gone down the various, whether it be channels to raise their issue or their complaint, etc. Their voices haven't been heard, so they thought the last piece, the last resort would be to contact their councillor, a local member of parliament as an example, and state their challenges. This member of parliament has then contacted a housing association and suggested, which I highlighted in red, I don't go into details, but it's really about what are you going to do to fix the problem and how you're going to compensate this resident for the amount of time they've taken out of the working environment to be at home, wait for contractors who either came along, tried to fix the problem, didn't fix the problem, etc., etc., etc. So this is an example of how, not to, whether it be, in essence, it's a privatisation within that space. And this is something that 1911 can absolutely help with the solutions and services that we provide. Some of you may be aware, there's a recent housing bill, the Green Housing Bill, social housing white paper. And in essence, this looks at ensuring that there's a better, so this is the how, the government has given us the how as to how it feels that we can improve the current environment. And in the first instance, it's about providing a better relationship between the resident and the landlord. It's also about making sure that their voices are heard, complaints are sped up in terms of being addressed, and also they are treated with respect and dignity. So the housing white paper looks at how this will be, how this will be achieved. And what we mean by the how, as an example, safety in homes looks at having monoxide alarms, fire alarms in place. Landlord performance looks at having tenant satisfaction. Complaints are sped up. Tenant voice, so this is ensuring that there's an environment where tenants can voice their concerns, whether it be in a tenant meeting or via a satisfaction survey. This is all obviously put together and sort of reviewed by the housing landlords. Ultimately, it's about ensuring that tenants are receiving good quality homes, particularly for first-time buyers. So currently within the housing environment, as an agenda for the UK, with regards to the government, there's a number of activity that's sort of bullet pointed as their key agendas, but for me, I think it's two things. I think in the first instance, there is an agenda to halve non-decent homes by 2030. So those are homes that potentially are EPC, so EPC stands for Energy Performance Certificate, and you have a number of categories, but anything from D and below would mean that, that's a retrofit environment potentially, and that's something that the government is trying to reduce. Also, they've provided an environment where landlords are able to increase rent once a year. However, they've given the tenant the ability to, whether it be question that increase, and the way that they're able to do that is via a first-tier tribunal. A first-tier tribunal, that's how that environment is to be redressed, to give that tenant sort of a bit of an approach. Here's an example of. Oh, sorry, I do apologise. Okay, I don't want to shout. Okay, so this is it. So here is an example of a non-decent housing chart. This is provided by the Ministry of Housing back in 2021, but this depicts an environment for 2006 to 2019. As you can see here, what's important is the blue chart or the blue bar, and it depicts social housing. So back in 2006, this was at 29%. At 2019, it fell down to 12%, and I believe right now, i.e. 2022, this is around, say, 10%. So what we're seeing is that the sort of decrease of non-decent housing within the ecosystem within the UK, or particularly within the private rented environment. I'm not sure whether you're familiar with this, but this is an example of what the government believes is the necessary measure to understand whether or not a dwelling is fit for habitation. What that means is this is classed as a minimum fitness standards environmental criteria, and in essence it states that a home should have a stable structure, i.e. the foundations of the wall should be obviously fixed correctly, it should have proper heating, cooking facilities, bath, shower, waste disposal, etc. Why is this important? because a home is made up of a number of components, as you can see on the left. You've got various external walls, chimneys, etc., that makes up the components of the home. However, with the current agenda in the current marketplace with regards to retrofitting and EPC requirements, etc., there was a need to understand which properties fall into a good criteria or poor criteria. And this is what the standard is, i.e., if you're living in a property, well, first of all, hands up if you know whether or not you're living in a Victorian building at home. I know I am. 1, excellent, 2, fantastic. So what we can see as an example is that a number of the properties in the UK, a significant number were built in the Second World War, obviously after the war. That being the case, there are a number of those properties that are within housing association domain and within local authority domain. That being the case, there is a need to understand how old are those buildings, more importantly, how old are the assets in those buildings. And this is the criteria that the government is using to identify those who are in poor condition. What we mean by poor condition, as an example, a wall structure in a house that was built 80 years ago potentially could be in poor condition, or a chimney that was built, say, for example, for a block of flats that has more than 6 floors, that is NA, so not applicable. However, if there was a block of flats that were built 30 years, 50 years ago, that is below 6 levels, then 50 years is the criteria. So what we're trying to understand is, you know, what is the level of complexity in terms of understanding which properties are in poor condition. What you see to the right, so this table here defines what's in poor condition. As an example, if there's a wall structure that potentially could be in poor condition, the way to understand it is by understanding if 10% of that wall was replaced, it falls into poor condition, or if there was a repair of up to 30% of that wall, it falls into poor condition. Excellent. So repair and maintenance, why is this important? Well, let's first of all understand what's the difference. So in the first instance, repair is about restoring functionality, and maintenance is about looking to preserve functionality. The difference is important within the social housing sector because we have an environment which is called planned maintenance. Planned maintenance is about understanding the tools and materials needed to fix a particular challenge or problem. A routine maintenance is about ensuring you've got the labour and the deadline as to when the fix has to be in place and understanding that. However, a major repair is, say, for example, where you have a major gas leak and that domain is not fit for habitation. And this is where this comes into the main. Why is all of this important? It's because of the time required to fix those different environments and the costs attributed to time, the costs attributed to that as well. Within the social housing environment, housing associations, local authorities, etc., these are the areas that require monitoring, whether it be from a standard assessment procedure, so that's looking at the assessment of a home, to ensure it has the right energy performance criteria, and you've got, say, for example, door entries, fire alarms, etc. For me, I would like to focus on EPC and also HIUs. So EPC stands for Energy Performance Certificate, and it looks at the environment of a home to make sure it's at a certain level. As you can see, A to G, and it caters for, say, for example, the energy on a per meter square floor. It looks at the environmental impact with regards to CO2, and also it looks at energy efficiency with regards to fuel costs. Those are the criteria that makes up an energy performance certificate. HIU, this stands for, obviously you can see, a heat interface unit, and this is used to manage heat networks in buildings. Why is this important? In the first instance, you can monitor heat temperature, you can manage flow, you can manage pressure, and it's easy to install, easy to manage, and it has a long life expectancy. So HIU is quite important. Louder. Okay.
Turn towards the mic.
Oh, I do apologise. Okay, all right. Okay, so next we have, so there was a report within the Inside Housing magazine, and this report highlighted as an example the various environments with regards to repair and maintenance within that space. And back in 2021, 2020 to 2021, there was 5.4 billion spent on repair and maintenance. There was a significant amount was spent by large housing associations ranging between, well, as you can see the figures there, and you can see the figures for those who are sort of in a less environment in terms of building stock. Okay, so here are some key signposts that I highlighted initially on my in my introduction. And what you see here is that at the bottom, these are accelerators that we believe, and it's been identified as assisting with regards to improving the current housing environment. What we mean by that is there's a requirement to accelerate, whether it be social landlords being able to gain funds from the government. There was a need to optimize energy use. There's a need to better use BIM, that's buildings information management within the design of the building, and also there is a need to retrofit solutions. So, as you can see here, by 2022, as an example, so MIR stands for Minimum Energy Efficiency Standard, and there is a need to upgrade buildings to EPC C by 2022. This may not necessarily apply to social landlords within the domestic environment, but it's worth noting. SAP, as I've mentioned, stands for Standard Assessment Procedure, and this came into play this month, i.e. in June, and there is a need to look at Part L. So Part L looks at any new building has to have the right EPC and carbon dioxide metrics by 2023. So that's a key factor in all new buildings that's coming into play. Leasehold reform refers to an individual who purchases a leasehold environment does not have to pay the free ground rent. So that's a key factor which the government has recently said. By 2025, there are a number of environments that need to be in play. First of all, as an example, you've got the Future Homes and Building Standard. In essence, this is the environment where social landlords potentially will have to pay a penalty if they don't meet requirements, and also they could be potentially offset type sort of inspections put in place there. In terms of the minimum energy performance efficiency bill, that's an environment where EPC standards need to come up between now and 2025. And the social housing regulatory bill, this looks at any new building that is built has to have 75 to 80% less carbon CO2 emissions coming out of that environment. Obviously, there is a ban on all gas and oil boilers, and you've got upgrades needed for the MERS upgrade, but also, most importantly, by 2030, there needs to have been 50 million homes retrofitted, which is a significant figure. And what runs through all of that environment that has to be addressed, that has to be monitored, that has to be viewed, is the golden thread. And that is a tall order in this environment. Also, we're able to look at whether it be within a housing association or within a local authority, within that environment, there was a number of assets. So say, for example, as I showed you the Brentford example, if there was a controller, so that's a mechanism, it could be a wall occupancy sensor device, you might be able to utilize legacy applications and, whether it be, use the word, retrofit them to today's environments, i.e. today's upgraded technologies. One of the ways of doing that is using FPGA, it stands for File Program Gateway Array, File Programmable Gateway Array, should I say. And yeah, it's just a way of bringing hardware and software together and using various gateway logics and or etc. to design the environment or application. So here's an example of our BIM environment, which provides real-life data. And what we mean by that is, if you can imagine, you have on our platform, you have the capability of selecting say for example, this is dummy data for Holiday Inn. Go to the platform, look at your floor plan, and you can, in essence, provision your sensor, literally input the details of the sensor, click add sensor, and you can actually place it in a given location. Here, for example, And what's really important and what's the value that we get from this environment is that we can see historical data of the performance of that sensor. So whether it be over a period of months, you can see temperature, CO2 data, and you can see also the data timestamp of the data when it was collected. Also, you then have, so this is an example of, within the platform, you have the capability of navigate. So in the first instance, you find your project, you find your module. So this is an example of locating a sensor in a building. And you may want to locate that sensor because you want to check the status is okay or not okay. The way that you do that, I'm just giving you a sort of mental map, is that you go to the platform, you'll navigate using an orbital immersive environment. You then, in essence, find your, say for example, in this case, a wall occupancy sensor. A wall occupancy sensor detects movement within a building or within an environment, within a given radius. The idea is that once you've located it, literally click on the properties, you can get a detail of all its history, whether it be where it's located in the building, the actual serial number of the sensor. Most importantly, you can find out if it's okay, i.e. green. If it's not okay, I'll show another slide where you can see the parameters around that environment. And also you can view to see historical data, as I showed you in the previous slide. You can then click on files, gives you the ability to upload a file. It could be from some form of inspection, but ultimately you can get a better understanding as to how well that asset is performing, i.e. that sensor. So here's an example where there was a defect in that sensor environment, i.e. defective sensors. Once again, you log into your environment, scroll down, whether it be looking at the architecture, the structure type, and then you find your sector, whether it be for that environment, should I say. And most importantly, you can see those sensors that are defective, i.e. in red, and that saves time for calling out a contractor to go to that specific location to fix the sensor and or find out why it's not working. So this is the type of environment that we're able to provide, and we're happy to discuss more, after this discussion. So here's an example of so this is an example of an installation asset management solution, and we're trying to fix a process loop. And the process loop we're trying to fix depicts three environments: a tenant, a regional manager, and a supplier, a contractor. Jane comes home, and this is, by the way, this is an admin view, but we can also provide a mobile version. Jane comes home and opens would be a laptop, tablet device, etc., or mobile phone environment, and she realizes she has an issue with the dishwasher. So in the first instance, there's a welcome message that welcomes Jane. She sees temperature details in and outside of her building. She's got the ability to look at latest messages. She's got EPC standards or EPC information based on her building. She's got building schedule dates, whether it be tax dates or recycle, waste bin, etc. She's got satisfaction form, tenant meeting, and she's got access to IoT devices that's in the property. And as I've mentioned here, she's got the criteria in the mobile phone, in her mobile phone environment as well. So she sends a message to the regional manager who logs in first in the morning. She's got the various messages, tasks, who is paid rent, and new messages, etc. As you can see, that individual has got access to whether it be fuel poverty within a regional environment. It could be the south of England, it could be, whether it be a particular town, city, etc. But it could be various properties in that environment. They've then got the EPC level environment to see which of those buildings are obviously falling within the monitoring area from an EPC standard perspective. You've got those individuals who are outstanding in terms of payment. They've got their schedule, and they've got, as I've mentioned, the location of where all those properties are. So this is a sort of a regional manager's view, either on a tablet device, mobile device, and she's got that information there. With regards to the process, the idea is that a message has been sent to this lady or gentleman, and then taken this task and sent it to the supplier. So the supplier then has got access to when the job was created, who is the job for, the date it's due to be fixed, and what's the status of the job. There is some information about the issue that's been picked up by the resident. They've sent that as a message, they've taken a picture of it, and there's been some communication with individuals within the housing association, local authority, etc. So then that information is then sent through in terms of to have somebody go through to that particular property. Actually, the supplier dashboard in the middle gives the contractor the location of the property, what needs to be fixed. That individual goes in, fixes the problem, takes a picture of it if the problem's been fixed, and uploads it. It's a very, very simple process and straightforward. But ultimately, it's about fixing the workflow, and this is something that we're passionate about doing to speed up that environment within the social housing sector. So finally, we are a people company that happens to be working in IT, supporting social housing. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, so the first slide, you mentioned something about swapping.
So swap. So currently, if you can imagine, you've got various buildings in the UK, and some of those buildings are, whether it be, let's say for example, you've got 100,000 buildings, and let's say for example, a quarter of those buildings are EPC A, so that's the top spec of a building. It's got all the solar panels, it's absolutely in the mark. You've then got those buildings that fall below that, and where they fall below, i.e. they could be, as you saw in the presentation, the quality of the home, it could be some home that was built 80 years ago, 100 years ago, etc. And the assets in those buildings need changing. It could be the floor, the wall, etc. It could be, structural changes. But those environments are classed as, if a local authority will spend money, or housing association, if a local authority will spend money on fixing that problem, it may be outside of their capability. So it might be better to swap that property with a housing association that has funding, and there's various partnerships that have that funding, where that property can then be fixed and then brought up to speed, brought up to the correct spec. But what's important is to understand the EPC and the structural composition of the building. And so that's what the swap is about. That's why I was mentioned. After you, yes, please.
With your the bid thing,
yeah.
You've got the, like you said, the makeup for each building, or you've got to apply that. Is that what you're saying?
So
mapping is basically.
Sure. So that environment could be, say, for example, we'll get the information of the building. So it could be the design, and we'll actually create that in our environment to give it a simulation.
Yeah.
So it's about taking the data, taking the floor plans, etc., and creating that BIM environment in our platform. So it's taking data and inputting it. However, we have our Chief Innovation Officer, he's sitting right next to you.
More details over there. So usually those are the CAD files which are designed by the architects. And there are also possibilities to pre-select what you would like to see as a render at the end, meaning that there are different types of classes of objects, like you can select all the drywalls, you can select only the concrete, you can select all the doors, you get some details like ceiling, and just you can also measure this, some shades. Maybe when you're getting the sensor or the device, you like to see if the whole way is the right sizes, so they do not interfere within the movement of the pieces. So it is a cut file we're uploading it.
Does that answer after you?
Yeah, so what was your target market with that? You mentioned contractors, and the explanation you're doing there from the tenant to
so that's
manager to
sure. So yeah.
In social housing, it's a whole different setup because it will depend on the housing association and who they've got their nominated their contractors.
So the environment is that, so say for example, there's a number of environments. So you might have smaller housing associations that may not have that environment, and they're required to have an all-in-one composition and all-in-one platform. Yes, I think the challenge that we've seen is data. How can we get data from various different environments into one centralized environment in order to make those informed decisions, in order to be more reactive to challenges in the sector or amongst the bases, etc. So that's why it's important to look at having one platform or one environment. If not, you'll be relying on one particular platform for your managing your tenants, one particular platform for managing your contractors, and obviously the environment, i.e. the landlord will have their own particular platform. What we're suggesting is that there's potential need to bring things together. And one of the ways that we've seen to do that, so we can address some of those process loops, is by having a single platform, as we're sort of exploring within our environment.
There's a lot of the housing associations have their own platforms.
Very true. And
that's it's always the integration, what we were discussing is about what the contractor's platform is, what their platform, the housing association platform, all councils, depending on who's applying.
Very true. Yeah.
And then the integration of that, because they don't all use the same. You think they would, like what you're trying to achieve.
The contractor side doesn't even need to be in the same platform as long as the data is back in real time.
Yeah, so that is the glitch that they can't get data flow from their system to their system.
Right.
So they have to give them their system login, try and connect their system to theirs, but it doesn't. So they say, well, log into our system and we'll update as you go. So your platform, what you have there, would be, it would have to be a standalone system, but everybody would have to use it.
Right, okay. So I think one thing to bear in mind is that, what you saw was the BIM environment. However, the BIM is sort of another stepping stone towards our digital twin environment. So the BIM is where that data is coming from to then get sort of integrated with our digital twin, and then to have that preventative environment, preventative monitoring on a particular building. So that's one demonstration. The other demonstration is more about customer relationship. It's more about, say for example, within the social housing sector, there was a law that looks at tenant voice, and you have to demonstrate that you are capturing your tenants' environment and their wishes and concerns, and you have to evidence that. So when you have, say for example, the tenant satisfaction survey, that's not only in the supplier environment, but also in the tenant's environment, you're able to capture that information. And, it's up to the social landlord, it's up to the social housing landlord to then put that information as a piece of evidence to the government to comply with the tenant's voice and to comply with the housing bills that are coming out. That will be made law, but have been made law, should I say.
And just comment here, if the social association already has the systems which are working properly, there have to be a model or a way how the data can be exposed in outside world, and then to either integrated with our solution or maybe just for utilizing Power BI or something else. There can be different views for different dashboards for different types of roles and persons, which means that by having a proper selection of the roles and the persons which need to see the data, it can be fully isolated and it can be also fully exposed in a different way. What the contractor sees, what the local persons are seeing, what the tenants are seeing. So it depends on the needs and the requirements. There are always, almost always, if I may say, need of customizations. So it is so true. Because as we have seen, each and every company has different ways of doing the business that they have. And that's why you see how the current processes are running and align the system to the process. Because if you go vice versa, and you have 1,000 employees, very difficult to educate them and use people. The same goes if you have a system and the personnel should start using something else. The transition process is painful, and the biggest issue is it is very prone to mistakes.
Our modules are already API and they can integrate with any other system if needed. Our goal is to shorten the data flow from one stakeholder to another, and ultimately to the government, because for reporting purposes, we can't. On one hand, all roads lead, or data roads lead to financials. On the other hand, all roads need to lead to the government entity for reporting purposes, and they need both of those directions need to have a flow that's almost real time in our world, with at least constraints and at least roadblocks, and no junk in, junk out. Data has to be clean, structured, and needs to be prepped for any kind of machine learning.
Because there is, you get some of the housing associations, the tenant can only contact them first, and the housing association then contact the contractor. So there is a bit of work to do before you go straight from tenant to contract.
Understood.
But I think if you're going to go target, you need to see the housing associations, speak to the big ones. Well, they're all legit now, but and it depends on the programs that you're looking at to put in with it.
The end result of that process loop is that there is a device that had an issue and that there's an invoice attached to it with some notes.
Yeah.
So how do we get that data set attached to the property at that time and that place, regardless where it came from, right? You can go through multiple different loops, but that particular data set is extremely valuable for reporting purposes, so they can come back to retrofitting, maintenance, financials, reporting, and so on and so on. That's kind of what we're trying to achieve here.
I know the contractors do have set stages of priority for some funds. If it's critical, then it's within an hour they have to be there.
Absolutely, plan through.
Yeah, and then they get sort of 1 hour, 2 hour, 4 hour, 8 hours, 24 hours, depending on the severity of the. If they've got a light bulb that's run out, honestly. They've got electrical problems, can you come and check it? It's more light in your house. The others are working fine. They'll be given 48 hours maybe. It's going back to your plan maintenance side of things, what contractors do.
Absolutely.
But it would be good out for people like the tenant liaison officers and resident liaison officers, because that's then what the contractors are. Some have them within the housing association, so they talk to each other, but the tenant will get we've got to go through. It's a good idea if you go straight to the contractors, because they'll be the ones that need to react.
For sure. Well, we can look at that.
The real value between the BIM and the customer side is the predictive maintenance. So if the BIM has ability to have data for those sensors and devices, and then we're being proactive about maintaining those devices. That way, then we have a different process with the contractors, and it's not always urgent, and it's always scheduled, and then it reduces the cost of maintenance eventually. So,
the good thing about the HIU as well is they can have a digital meter. You don't have to gain entrance to do any testing. You can just scan it from outside. There's like 2,500 written down in Southampton.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing.
One other functionality which is usually needed is if you are engaging in a contractor, before you do the trust, the system can also have mechanisms to understand when the contract has been recently in a specific apartment or building. So there are possibilities to put a small processing screen. The system will generate a number of critical personnel, which is supposed to serve something, but at least you have to go there and scan it and report that it's in there. And there are also possibilities to connect everything with the end users or the tenants to say they are satisfied or not. It's on Mars, how will we make our responsibilities?
Yeah, well, we got around some of that ones. Our engineer who set to the job. The tenant would give a password.
Right.
And if the engineer got there, and he was not our engineer, and he didn't know the password, wouldn't that be?
Right.
So it's just other ways of identifying the right person. That's kind of thing. Because like I say, somebody's manipulated the data, why not put this before? People order their TVs or whatever, because manipulate that data. But they wouldn't get them because that's given direct to the engineer.
Absolutely. So that's quite interesting what we just said there, because Alex Randall, who's the next chap who will be presenting, and he is, so Alex is the head of sales at E.ON, UK. He's the head of installation services, and let me hand over to him. So basically, second presentation. Can you hear us, Alex?
Yep, I can hear you fine. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can. We can hear you.
Good.
Fantastic. All right. So let me hand over to you, and we can go from there.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you everybody for attending. Apologies I can't be there. I've unfortunately despite being able to avoid it for the last 2 years, managed to catch COVID last week. So absolutely gutted that I can't attend. But yeah, I'll get straight into it. So, yep, my name is Alex Randall from E.ON Installation Services. E.ON Installation Services is the principal contracting arm of E.ON. E.ON Residential Solutions. So it carries out installations of energy efficiency measures and whole house retrofits for the able to pay market and particularly the social housing sector. I'm going to be going through basically the importance of data and what I've learned over the last 18 months. So E.ON, a lot of people know us as the people that send you gas and electricity bills, but we do a lot more than that. There's over 70 companies within the UK under the E.ON umbrella. We're working currently with around 60 housing associations and local authorities, obviously, as well as installing thousands of heating systems and solar PV arrays to residential customers nationwide. A few little facts about E.ON that you probably wouldn't have known about. We are actually #1 in the UK for the installation of residential PV arrays. We're on target to install around 8,000 this year. We are currently now #1 in the UK for in terms of kilowatts for installing heat pumps, and as well as we own and manage a number of district heating systems and EV charge points and networks. So I've been working in the energy sector for just over 12 years now. 7 of those have been with E.ON, but I've actually only been working in the social housing sector side of the business for the last 18 months. But energy wasn't where I started. Years and years ago, when I did my degree at university back in 2006, I studied a degree in the financial markets. So in 2006, I left university, moved up to the bright lights of London, and went to work in the financial markets. And the reason I'm telling you this story is very, very, at the very beginning of my career, there was a statement that was released, a quote that has now become quite famous. And at the time, it rocked the markets, the financial markets, but it also certainly divided opinion. And that comment, or that that statement, was data is the new oil. Now, at the time, I said it very much divided opinion, but a lot of people within the financial markets laughed at this, and clearly said, well, how on earth is data going to be more valuable than a commodity like oil? Well, you fast forward 15 years, and if you look at some of the logos on that picture, I'm sure there's some big brand names that you'll be very, very familiar with. And a lot of these operate on data-driven business models. And some of the brands that you'll see on the screen have little to no assets at all. So over the last 15 years, it has, if you just look at the stock market and the companies in there, it has proven the fact that data is both extremely important and valuable. And then when you also bring into consideration the world real estate markets. Now, if you look there, you've got China, United States, Japan, and then the United Kingdom. So the United Kingdom has the 4th most valuable real estate market in the world. And when you consider the social housing sector owns over 4.3 million properties within the UK. Now, this makes up around 20% of the UK market. You've got to ask yourself the questions really is, why hasn't data or capturing data caught on in this sector? And why haven't we embraced data like other sectors have across the markets? Well, I'm going to tell you a couple of little stories from over the last 18 months from when I started working in the social housing sector, just to give you a bit of an idea of the state of play. So when I first joined the social housing team at E.ON, I thought, right, I want to get on a number of customer calls to get a real understanding of, the clients, what their problems were, really get a feel for the market. So I joined a call with a housing association who I'm not going to name, and E.ON had been working with them, and they'd secured a Warm Homes Fund grant to install 312 first-time central heating systems. So they've been working with this housing association in the Midlands I think they got up to about 292 or something like that. And they were about 20 installs short of meeting their fulfillment for this grant money. So we kind of had it was a bit of a crisis call. The Housing Association came on, we came on, and we said, you know, what are we going to do? Are we going to hand back some of the funding for these last 20 properties, or are we going to try and find some more? And that's what everyone had been doing for the last couple of weeks. I've been trying to find more. So we were on this call, and all of a sudden the asset manager came on the call. He joined very late, and he said, don't worry, everybody, I've solved the problem. So we all said, well, this is fantastic. You know, where are these properties? How have you found them? You know, what was the solution here? So he announced to everybody on the call, I've just found another street we didn't know we owned. Absolutely mind blowing. And while I sat back on this call and everybody was, you know, giving each other virtual high fives, you know, we've found another 50 properties that we can install these measures on. I sat back stunned and in silence. And I came off the call and I thought, well, this has to be an isolated incident. This can't be, you know, this can't be a commonplace within the social housing sector. Well, it wasn't. It wasn't a one-off at all. About a week later, I joined another phone call with another housing association, a member of the G14, which is one of the largest 14 housing associations in the UK. I think they've got about 60 or 70,000 properties. And again, we'd working with them, we'd help them put a fund application in to get a grant for the Warm Homes Fund. And they'd been awarded funding for 663 first-time central heating systems. So we thought, great, this is an enormous project. Let's get into this data. Let's start getting out to these properties and installing some first-time central heating systems. Well, the first couple of months went past, and that number of 663, they dropped it to 400. They said, we're not going to have that many, but we think we'll have 400. A couple of months later, it dropped to 200. And then towards the end of the project, out of the initial 663, if you want to have a guess at how many we actually installed, it was two first-time central heating systems out of 663 that they told us from their data required first-time central heating systems and met the criteria. And if you want to know what happened to those two shiny boilers, the tenants took them out and sold them on eBay. Would you believe it? Now you can't make that stuff up. And this is all stuff that I was learning in the first few weeks. And in the end, the Housing Association apologised to us profusely, and they said, look, we're really sorry about this. They gave us £125,000 compensation for liquidated damages and loss of enabling costs. And we are now working on them, and they're going through a portfolio review at the moment and trying to analyse that. So out of the £31 million worth of grant funding that we secured for the Warm Homes Fund, which equated to 7,486 first-time central heating systems, 50% of them were installed. And that was basically down to two factors. One, the data they gave us was wrong. And two, the tenants didn't want them in the first place. So this was a ongoing thing. This isn't just the Warm Homes Fund. We've been working on ECO3, which is the Energy Company Obligation Scheme, where, again, we're given these projects, we're given this data to work from, we build a project based on the data, and then the data ends up being completely wrong. Only a few months ago, we were given a cheque for a housing association in Cheshire. They gave us a cheque for £250,000 and said, right, there you go, guys. Here's a list of 750 properties. They all require cavity wall insulation and loft insulation. So we went out and said, right, okay, let's get out there and survey these properties. And out of those 750 properties that definitely needed both measures, we installed 11 loft insulation and 7 cavity wall. The remaining of that £250,000 was spent on surveying these properties and carrying out EPC certificates so that this housing association could use that information to update their data so that their data was in order for future projects. And the list goes on. I could go on and on all day telling you about some of the things that I've heard. Again, Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, which is the latest stream of funding that housing associations have been able to access. Again, building projects based on poor data. There are companies that are handing back funding right, left and centre across the UK purely because the data that they provided doesn't match the projects that they scoped out. Now, over the last 10 years, E.ON and over the hundreds of or thousands of schemes that we've carried out and you know, almost millions now of measures that we've installed, we've developed a rule of thumb that our operations team work to, and that is that around 50% of the data that housing associations give us is going to be incorrect, despite what they tell us. And this is massive. This is really, really massive. And when I go back to that real estate slide and how other industries have embraced data, and you think the value of the social housing stock, and a lot of housing associations will go out to the market and they'll go to the banks and they will borrow money from the banks based on the value of their property. And now banks are starting to do green loans. They're starting to insist on EPC data being in place. They want to have more granular detail to be able to lend against these properties. This is huge for the social housing sector, and it's something that they really need to embrace. So I'm going to tell you, I guess, a couple of the reasons that the sector is in this mess. Now, obviously, I can't see everybody, so I don't know how many housing associations are in there. I'd love to know, and I'd love to know if this sounds, you know, familiar to any of you as well. But what we've established is that housing associations portfolios, and following on from what John said, is they have multiple platforms, and this is why this one in the Midlands, you know, had this problem where they found a street they didn't realise they owned. Obviously, somebody within the business knew that they owned this street because there were people living in it, and these people were paying their bills. But the point was the asset manager didn't know about these properties. So these portfolios, which normally get sent to us over on an Excel spreadsheet, housing associations are often very much under-resourced, particularly some of the smaller ones. They have things like staff turnover, where the portfolio gets handed to someone else and handed to someone else. Things aren't kept updated. Poor communication between different departments, and again, not working on the same platform. And also a lack of ownership within businesses about who should be managing this. You know, some housing associations aren't big enough to have asset management teams that keep this up to date. But another key contributing factor to this is how a number of the funding streams have been set up over the last 10 years, in particular the early eco funding mechanisms and eco 3, particularly in the insulation market. Now, we refer to it as the Wild West over the last 10 years. Insulation companies were able to go out to housing associations and say, look, we will survey your properties for free. We will install the insulation for free, because the funding they received for it was so massive that they could afford to do this. And the problem that you had is that they would go out, they'd do the survey for free. If there wasn't a measure there, they wouldn't report back. And if there was a measure there, they'd install the insulation. They wouldn't always carry out a post EPC, so a before and after. You know, they'd install the measure, they'd get their money, and then they'd tootle off onto the next property. And this data wasn't relayed. And as it was a free service, it wasn't particularly a great service of relaying data. So the situation you've got at the moment is that there is around 11 million homes in the UK that do not have an energy performance certificate. Now, the government's introduced a number of things like buying and selling properties. You now have to have one. Getting a mortgage, you now have to have one. But there are obviously lots of properties out there that don't fit those criteria, and they don't have EPCs on them. But there are a number of mechanisms coming in place to ensure that they will be enforced in future. Now, the other thing that we found is that social housing companies will use software that clones data. Now, there are a number of software packages out there, you know, Sava, Streamline, Drian. There's lots of them out there. I'm particularly interested in IT Labs one. I think that offers a fantastic platform for a number of different areas of the business, which solves a lot of problems. But what you have with these housing associations is around 30% of their properties on average that we've found don't have EPCs. And often the EPCs that they've got are either out of date. And one of the problems that you've got with an EPC certificate is they're only as good as the person who's done the survey. And I hear stories all the time of people going out and surveying 5 or 6 properties and then looking at the rest of the street and thinking, well, they're all pretty much the same. They wander off down to McDonald's or Costa Coffee and fill all the rest out, on the paperwork and submit them. And that's what you get if you pay £35 and use sort of large consultancies. It's very important to get good quality surveyors. So, for example, if you take a row of 10 terraces and they're meant to go out and EPC 6 of them, and they only end up EPCing 3 or 4 of them properly, and then the remainder of them are used on what they call clone data. They use the data that they've got, and it uses artificial intelligence to look at the other properties down that street, takes a number of various different data points, and then creates you a cloned data, and that provides you with a cloned EPC. So all of a sudden you get these portfolios where they thought were maybe 60 or 70% right, and the rest is cloned. If you put bad data in at the beginning, it only gives you even worse data out the end. And this is what we're finding. The portfolios, and this is where we get this rule of thumb, tend to be around about 56 or 50% accurate. So hopefully that's giving you the importance of why collecting the data is so important. But I'm going to tell you one of the reasons that we really need to embrace it. So, very topical. I'm sure all of you have heard on the news about fuel poverty. We've all heard about the price cap increase. Everybody's going to start to see that coming through their bills in the next month or so. So, Ofgem introduced the price cap a couple of years ago and recently increased the price cap. So now that the average cost of a dual fuel bill in the UK is going to rise from £1,200 to around £2,000. Now, Ofgem have just recently indicated that there could be a potential 40% increase on top of what we've already seen coming in October when the next price cap comes up. Now, that will mean the typical household bill is going to go from £1,200 to nearly £2,800 a year. Now, that's currently 1 in 3 properties are living in fuel poverty. And there was a recent report released by the National Energy Action, who campaigns to end fuel poverty. Now, they've estimated that around 12,000 deaths a year have been contributed by fuel poverty. And of those, 3,000 of those can be directly related to fuel poverty. So you're looking at somewhere between 3,000 and 12,000 deaths a year that could be avoided if we can help people out of fuel poverty. And one of the reasons, or one of the solutions to this, is to provide them with decent housing and decent heating. Now, when the price cap came in a few years ago and the most recent increase was brought out, over 31 suppliers in the market have gone bankrupt in the last 12 months. Now, that's cost the taxpayer around £4 billion. So a lot of people see I'm from E.ON and think, well, he's probably going to be against the price cap. Well, I'm absolutely not against it. The price cap is needed. And what the price cap does is it ensures that everybody gets a fair deal. Now, a fair deal in terms of what we pay for energy, our costs, and then what we pass it on to our consumers for. So everybody gets a fair deal, but getting a fair deal doesn't necessarily go far enough to help those that are in need. So why have prices gone up? Well, energy is a global commodity. It's affected by global and economic effects from around the world. So COVID, the war in Ukraine. There are a number of these global economic factors that contribute to energy increase. So the point I'm trying to make is that there's nobody on this call, or there isn't anybody in this room that is responsible for price increases, including E.ON. We don't make energy anymore. But it is our problem to solve. And it is up to housing associations, companies like us, to come up with some kind of a solution to help people in fuel poverty, solve this energy conundrum. So what can we do? Well, there's no point focusing on the price of energy because it's out of our control. What we need to focus on is how much energy people use. And we can do that by building people better homes or retrofitting homes, providing people with more energy efficient properties. So luckily, the technology is all there. You know, the scientists have done this and the products are available on the market. You look at insulating your walls first, where you can lose up to 35%. You look at windows and doors and floors and then the roof as well, which you can lose up to 25% of your heat through. You then also have to focus on energy efficiency, things like fitting LED light bulbs. I'm sure all of us have now got lots of LEDs in our home. The fitting of smart heating controls, which is something I'm going to touch on a bit later, and I know that John covered a little bit in his presentation. And then also educating consumers or tenants as well. It's an incredibly important part of it all. And then really the last factors are some of the more the newer or sort of groundbreaking technologies around clean heat pumps. Now, heat pumps have actually been around for a long time, but the efficiency levels of getting them are incredibly good now. And obviously the government is pushing us for this move away from gas and our dependency on the likes of Russia for gas, and to move over the electrification of heat, clean heat from renewable energy. And then I guess the final, piece in the jigsaw would be to install solar PV, so to provide people with clean renewable energy on their own property. So if we want to save people's lives and save the planet, we need to improve the houses we live in. Pretty simple. So how are we going to do it? Well, luckily the government is dangling some pretty big sticks at them, pretty big carrots at the moment on the end of a very large stick. Now, those carrots are Eco4, the Energy Company Obligation Scheme, number 4, which was hot off the press release yesterday. Now, Eco4 can provide up to 100% of the measures you want to install for properties that have E, F or G rated EPC ratings. The new one, Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, where Wave 2 is about to be launched and will be closing in the next couple of months. Now that can cover up to 50% of the cost of the measures that you want to install for properties E, F, G and D as well. So the funding mechanisms are definitely there, and you're going to need to take the carrot. If you want to spend money retrofitting, doing properties up, improving people's lives and EPC ratings, take the carrots, they're there. And if you don't, they're going to hit you with a pretty big stick. The target for EPC rated D properties for the social housing sector is 2025, and they all need to be to EPC C rated property by 2030. So not long now until those targets have to be hit. So how are we going to access them? Well, this is where things have changed a little bit. On the left, I've got Eco3, which is the old scheme that finished back in April, and we've got Eco4, which is officially launches on the 1st of July, so tomorrow. Now, previously, Eco3, the process was you identify the property, you identify the measures that need to be installed. You'd come to a company like E.ON. We would provide you with a figure of how much funding you're going to get. We agree a contract between us to go and install these measures or not, as the case may be in some of the stories that I've told you. And then once the measures are installed, we pay you the eco funding. Now on the right is the new Eco4 scheme, where things are going to be a little bit different. So same couple of steps. You identify the properties, you identify the measures that need to be installed to push the property up to EPC bands now. So you can't just install one measure, you've got to install a minimum of 2 to 3 measures. And then this is where things change. You're going to need to carry out either a retrofit assessment under PAS 2035 regulations, or you're going to have to take out a new EPC, which is accurate. And then you pass that information to the RFC, which is the retrofit coordinator. They will then plan out the project for you and tell you exactly what measures are the measures right, what measures you need to install, and in which order that you're going to install them. Then Once you've got that information, you can then obtain how much funding you're going to receive. And then we agree a contract. We'll go out and install the measures within 3 months, and then we will pay you your Eco4 funding. So if you don't install the measures that you identified first of all, and you don't install them in the right order that you're told to install them in, you won't get your funding. You will get what's called a partial score, which is going to be around 40% of the original amount that you were quoted. So if you want to do these measures and you want to do them in the most commercially viable way, you're going to have to do the surveys up front. You're going to have to gather the data, and that data is going to have to be correct. Otherwise, you're going to do all the work, you're going to install all the measures, and then you're only going to get a very small portion of the funding. When you consider things like air source heat pumps can cost £10,000 to £15,000, and external wall insulation can cost anywhere from £10,000 to £25,000, this is a significant amount of money. And this is one of the big changes and why data is going to be so important. Now, the same for social housing decarbonisation. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of projects out there that we're hearing about in the market where things are going slightly wrong. Again, they identified the properties, identified the measures, they submitted their bid to the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, to BAYS. They were awarded the funding, they've agreed a contract to install the measures, and then they're going out and carrying out the surveys. And what we're finding, surprise, surprise, is the data's wrong. The surveys are wrong. And what's happening is people are having to hand back money. Now, what's happening is they're either not installing some of the measures that they originally said they were going to install, or they're having to try and find other properties which are like for like match, and they can install them or install those measures. Or they're going back to BAYS and saying, we apologise, BAYS, sorry, our data was wrong, here, have some money back. And BAYS are getting pretty annoyed about it, to be honest. So the changes that have coming in for wave 2 is you identify the measures for the properties, and then you're going to have to carry out an EPC survey or a technical survey, because on wave 2, the funding is going to be awarded on you on the strength of your bid and the strength of your data. So you have to get your project in order and you have to get your data in order first before you get awarded the funding, because if your bid's not strong, they're not going to award you the funding. If the bid's strong and your data's right, you then carry out your retrofit assessments. Your retrofit after you've agreed the contract with your installers, you carry out your retrofit assessments and your retrofit coordinations again. You carry out all the install of the measures, and then you report back to BAYS to say, yes, we've installed these measures that we said we were going to install. We've done them in the right order. And then BAYS say, fantastic, here's the rest of your funding. Otherwise, you have to hand it back. So a very different mindset that's going on. And to be honest, it is a completely new mindset for the housing associations. They've had this culture of surveys are being done free and lots of measures are being installed for free. So this whole new mindset that they're going to have moving forward, instead of being reactive, it's going to be about being forward thinking. It's about detailed planning, gathering of the right data, and they're going to have to become data-driven businesses. And that is going to be the future of the industry. So that really covers my main points around the problems that are around with data in the social housing sector, the importance of why we need it, the fact that it's going to be required to access the funding schemes, to be able to upgrade the houses, to be able to improve people's lives and help reduce the carbon footprint. So before I go on to answer any questions, I'm just going to give a little bit of a glimpse into some of the things that we see in the future over the next 12 months. Smart homes is absolutely going to be one of them. Having that data, again, is incredibly important. The introduction of green loans will require people to have that data. We're also seeing, sorry, bear with me. We're also seeing the introduction of smart heating controls and that data being collected. Now, smart heating controls are one of the measures that are going to be funded over the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund and under Eco4. Now, smart heating controls are like a smart thermostat. We're seeing a whole range of different types of quality and the characteristics or features that they can do. But what they do is they install them in these homes, and they can measure things like humidity levels. They can measure the heat of the property. They can measure air pressures of the property. They can also start to measure motion, lights. You're going to be able to send a message to these people in the homes. You can introduce geofencing, where you can tell when somebody is in or out of a property. And these smart heating controls in the right way can save tenants up to around £164 a year. But more importantly, all the data from these data points can be captured in the back end on a platform. And when you consider some housing associations have 120,000 properties, and you think of the value of data and the value of analyzing that data and how useful it can become to companies that make boilers, companies that make air source heat pumps, all of a sudden housing associations can build other revenue streams based on the data they're collecting across their portfolios. There are also a number of other features that can help. So things like humidity levels. Now, if you, for example, look at your portfolio and you've got a handful of properties that have incredibly high humidity levels in their properties, you can work out, well, is this the tenant? Is this the tenant that is heating their home in the wrong way? Is it they're leaving their clothes on the radiator and it's creating lots of humidity? Are they not opening their windows? Do they not have trickle vents on their windows? All these different levels. Or is it something more severe? Is it the fact that the cavity wall insulation has perhaps failed on that property? So you can start to ring fence problem properties. You can also do remote diagnostic, as John covered, and one of the people in the audience there, I noticed you answered a question and said, well, currently it goes, the tenant makes a complaint, it goes to the housing association and then goes to the contractor. Well, we've got housing associations now that have installed these smart control systems, and they're getting warning notifications that go directly to the contractor before the tenant even knows about it. So they might be asleep in the middle of the night and know that their boiler's failed. So instead of having boiler repairmen out on the road checking property after property after property, they're getting a notification. They come in first thing in the morning and they get a list of 5 properties where the boiler's failed. They can get out to those properties and fix them before the tenants even had a chance to call in and complain. So there are huge advantages from having all these data points being collected through smart heating controls or smart thermostats and smart homes. And they're just a few of the key points that you can, the key advantages that you can have from installing them. Another technology that we're finding is incredibly popular at the moment, and particularly in the social housing decarbonisation fund. So E.ON invested and bought a company called Nationwide Drones. And if you can see in the background, the picture there's a gentleman with a headset on. Now, this headset fires thousands of laser points out the top. What they do is they walk around the property, and they walk around the property for about 45 minutes, and then they leave. Now, what that survey can do is it can carry out a pre-EPC contract, because it also takes photographs and video footage as well. It takes all the measurements of the property internal, and they have a drone that they send up externally to scan the whole property. So you get your internal measurements, your external measurements, you know where your radiators are, the size of them, size of the windows. All of this can be fed through a computer system, and we can perform EPC surveys, we can perform retrofit assessment surveys, we can produce architect quality design drawings of the whole houses. We can do the calculations and measurements for external wall insulation, as well as do heat calculations for the installation of air source heat pumps. And we can also survey the roof as well, so that we can go away and then design solar PV installs, all through one 45-minute survey. Now, I know if there's a lot of housing associations in there, they will know that getting in a property is half the battle. And when you start to do an EPC survey, a retrofit assessment, and then you come back, somebody needs to do a boroscope to do the walls, you can end up having 4 or 5 surveys, and this can add huge amounts of cost and time to projects. And then eventually tenants sometimes get so annoyed, they say, look, just don't come back. I'm fed up of all these people coming around my house. So we've found that we can drop the surveys on average from 3 down to 1, and we can drop the survey time from around 3 or 4 hours down to about 45 minutes, one-stop shop. And I think going back to the presentation before where John said about having these data points, this is all the information that we can hold and we can download, and you can put into your own software packages and use that data to create digital twins of your properties, and they give you that granular detail that you're going to require moving forward for funding streams, for borrowing against your properties. Literally, the opportunities are endless with this data, and it can be used also as a revenue stream as well. So that's pretty much it from me. Sorry, I've got no idea whether I went a little bit over there or not. So if anybody's got any questions, I'm happy to give any answers. John, you may have to help me out here because obviously I can't see the audience and I may not be able to hear their questions. So, but yeah, I hope that was helpful, everyone. And I hope I've drilled into everybody how important data is. And I'll pass you back to John.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, Alex. That was very informative. And I think we're all more aware of the data issue within the housing sector. So thanks for sharing that. Let's hand over to the audience. Does anyone have any questions, please?
It's not a question, but that was fascinating to hear. I mean, as you say, it's really informative. You know, the fact that people have been running with data, dodgy data for so long, it is mind-blowing. And the description that Alex showed about, we just found a street that we didn't even know about, you know. It's just, you can't make this stuff up. And you know, and I laugh inside, but, you know, that has an impact. It costs us. So, yeah, I guess the question there is, you know, how quickly can we get to a point where that doesn't happen anymore? Is the legislation stuff actually fixing this to make sure that anybody involved in this has to provide that, and there's consequences of not doing that?
Okay, did you get that, Alex?
Yeah, I heard all of that. And yeah, I think in terms of the sector, and you know, I don't want to speak for everybody. You know, there are housing associations that are out there that are very forward thinking, but my general gist and my understanding is that data is in a pretty poor state. It needs to get to a much better state. And I think the most recent social housing decarbonisation fund, that funding mechanism has really pointed out to housing associations how important data is. And there are a number of our clients that we've been speaking to that are doing stock valuation and stock-wide surveys and spending several months trying to get their data up to scratch. So I've definitely seen in the last 18 months a real attitude change. And I think it goes back to, you know, that carrot and stick scenario is that, you know, there's an interesting trial that they're doing. I think it's in the Netherlands, where if no EPC, default G. And I'd love them to bring that in this country. That if you don't have an EPC, it defaults to a G, and see how that affects everybody's portfolios and their reporting, because it will really encourage people to pull their finger out. And the thing that I'm seeing is a lot of housing associations have been going on this cloned data, and they've been taking it as gospel. And as we're getting out to site, they're realizing that it's wrong. So the attitudes have changed. The funding mechanisms have changed. I think where it won't come into effect is for those housing associations that are incredibly unorganized and that aren't going in for the funding streams, and those that are, you know, almost completely oblivious to some of the funding streams out there. But I think in general, most housing associations and local authorities are aware of the issue. The attitudes change, and the tools are there to start improving it. The one thing I think is the cost of EPC surveys or retrofit assessments, particularly retrofit assessments coming in about £240 is quite high. And there is a shortage of retrofit assessors out there. And one of the things I would have liked to seen is these funding mechanisms support the cost of the surveys. Because there are there are housing associations that have very, very tight budgets, and they don't necessarily have the money to go out and survey 10,000 properties at a huge cost. We're trying to work on ways round that we can kind of, you can start to claim back the cost of it. but it's that upfront cost which people are struggling with. But yeah, to answer your question, attitudes change, things are changing, and I think we will be there, but I think it's going to take 3 or 4 years before we're in a really good place, and we're able to start using that data as potential revenue streams for the housing associations.
Excellent. Thank you, Alex. Thank you.
Do you have?
Yeah, I might miss the detail, but is there any assessment from a financial point of view? What is the return of investment if there are no supports coming from the government by introducing the better isolation, better management compared to the saving that they will introduce?
Okay, so I think I heard that you're interested to know the return on investment for the installation of the measures to improve the property. Was that right, John?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. It's very difficult to tell, and to be honest, the return on investment isn't great. Depends on the measures you install. Things like external wall insulation can cost you £10,000-20,000. The savings it gives the tenant isn't anywhere near that level, but the tenant doesn't have to pay for it. So the tenant gets the savings, the housing association has to spend the money. To be honest, a lot of housing stock, there are probably 2 pots of housing stock. There are what we call hard to treat properties, so ones that are in areas of natural beauty. They have they're grade listed, have architectural features about them which make them very, very hard to treat. That represents a whole bigger problem. And there is a large proportion of social housing stock, which, to be honest, and I hate to say it, would probably be better off being pulled down and rebuilt as new builds. But that isn't necessarily the case. What's going to happen? And I think that the government are pouring so much money into this, and they're putting so much funding there. I think the housing associations just have to take that funding, and the main focus has to be on improving the tenant's life. And it will be at a cost of, I guess it's a cost of the taxpayer and the government's commitments to green homes. But I guess we've got a responsibility to make sure that everybody has a warm and comfortable home. And those that aren't in those, I guess that's where some of the funding is being funneled to support those properties. I think solar PV is now the one that represents the best saving. That and air source heat pumps in well insulated properties. An air source heat pump can be 3 to 4 times more efficient than a gas boiler. And solar PV, when you consider electricity is around 28 pence per kilowatt, that can have an enormous impact on a customer's bill. So there are the higher end products which provide the biggest savings, and then there are also the quick wins like that, the thermostats, which I think I showed on there, on average saves the tenant around £170 a year, only cost about £200 to £400 to fit. So they'll nearly pay themselves back in a year or so. Sorry, that was a very long-winded and sort of a vague answer, but I hope that information helped.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks.
Brilliant. If you don't mind me asking, Alex, can you explain what is an air source heat pump, please?
Oh, that's a whole webinar in itself. Well, as you can see in the picture behind me, this is what an air source heat pump looks like. And what it basically does is it takes air, it compresses it, and when you compress air, the molecules in the air, it creates heat, and then that's used to pump around a heating system. And it's a renewable source. Well, the technology is renewable, and if it's powered by electricity, which is becoming more and more renewable, it can offer you what's called a clean heat. And the ratio of the electricity that you put in, you get 4 times the amount of heat for the electricity that goes in. So, for example, an electric storage heater, you put 1 kilowatt of electricity in, which will cost you 28p, and you get 1 kilowatt of heat out, which will cost you 28p. So for every kilowatt of heat, it's costing you around 28 pence. For an air source heat pump, you put 1 kilowatt of electricity in and you get 4 kilowatts of heat out. So you're paying around 7 pence a kilowatt per kilowatt of heat. So it's a much more energy efficient way of producing heat, which will be 4 times cheaper than an electric storage heater. Where you've got a slight problem is gas is relatively cheap, but we're now at that parity point where gas and electricity through a heat through a heat pump are about the same cost. Obviously, you've got the cost of installing a heat pump and upgrading your radiators, but I think a lot of housing associations are still going with gas because it is a cheap way to heat properties, but that's not going to last forever. And I think anyone would be very naive if they don't think eventually the levies, the climate change levies on electricity will be transferred over to gas. And that will be one of the mechanisms that the government use to create that makes gas more expensive and electric cheaper to push everybody over to this electrification of heat. So if somebody wants to learn more about heat pumps, happy to do another presentation, or I can send around a link of a webinar that I did recently where we had Dakin and some other air source heat pump experts on that can tell you the real science behind it, which is, I'm going to struggle without a slide or two, I'm afraid.
No problem at all. Absolutely fantastic, Alex.
Sorry. I was just going to say that the government not holding into account some sort of master data management system like a TALM or Informatica that's going to say this data quality you're getting to therefore release the funding down to the housing associations, because it sounds like they're not, because obviously there's massive erroneous wastage of spend. 50% of the data is it's crap. Right? So, it's much no good to know this.
So to understand the question, what do you?
Yeah, so I was asking, do you know what the government investing in to basically keep these housing associations honest? So the data to release the funds is actually,
Got you. Yes. Okay. Alex, do you have an answer? If not, I can. Okay, so
you can answer this one, John. Yeah.
Right, so there's a number of legislation that's coming into place, whether it be you've got the Housing Bill Act, you've got the Decent Homes Act. So there's a number of measures which the government has said that this is what we identified for housing associations, local authorities to engage in order to provide decent homes. And, as an example, there's an EPC requirement for 2025 that all EPC or buildings within the housing sector should be at EPC C by 2025. So there are various laws in place to guide housing associations and local authorities, and it's the government's then sort of producing a carrot in a sense of with the SHFD, dangling that carrot with regards to making them aware that if they follow some measures, they'll be able to receive some funding. So there is some incentives that the government is providing to help housing associations, local authorities, or the social housing sector to fall in line or to improve their environment.
So, sorry, John, does that mean that within 3 years, them 11 million properties that are no data, they'll default to G? We've got to have an EPC.
So in Alex's world, that would be the case.
I would love that to happen, yeah.
Yeah, so in Alex's world, potentially that could be the case. However, I think there's, say for example, there's a new build. So new builds have to have EPCC from the get-go by 2025, I believe. So there are some parameters that,
with the funding that needing to be an EPC registered, or you don't get your funding and then parameters that need to be achieved.
So the funding applies to the retrofit environment. Yeah. So a building or property that needs to be retrofitted would get that funding, from what I've understood. Is that correct? Or am I...
Sorry, can you say that again, John? I didn't quite hear.
So there's a gentleman who's asked whether or not the funding, is that attributed to retrofits, or is the funding attributed to those, or can the funding be attributed to new builds or retrofits?
This is all for the retrofit market, which I'm talking about. There isn't a lot of funding mechanisms out there at the moment for new build that I'm aware of. I know a lot of housing associations are doing a lot of new builds, but I'm not aware of any of them. Most of this, all these funding streams are for the retrofit market.
And the decarbonisation agenda for 2050.
So what's E.ON's outlook on hydrogen?
Here's a question for you, Alex. What is E.ON's outlook on hydrogen?
Cool, I'm getting some heavyweight questions here. Okay, so hydrogen, I actually, in my previous role, I actually had quite a lot of involvement in it. And hydrogen's a great question. And again, I'll share a link for a webinar I did a while ago. We had Worcester Bosch come on and present and talk through their first hydrogen boiler. You'll get different views on hydrogen within the market, but E.ON's is very much so that there are some very large industrial sector customers out there. So the manufacturing of steel, cement, glass, these kind of major materials that require incredibly high heats. We're talking thousands of degrees to be able to smelt metal and create glass. And we believe at E.ON that although hydrogen is I like hydrogen, I think it's great. It's getting hold of the hydrogen is going to be the difficult point because it takes a kilowatt of electricity to make a kilowatt of hydrogen, and with electricity being quite cheap, eventually when there's enough renewable electricity, hydrogen, the actual cost of hydrogen will come down. But what we believe at E.ON is that hydrogen is going to be funneled to those businesses and organizations that require incredibly high heat. So the very large industrial sector, because the problem is with a heat pump is it's a fantastic technology, but it won't get your temperature over 70 degrees. So it's great for heating a home, but you can't use a heat pump to make paper. You can't use it to make steel or cement or glass. So there is a big, it's very much divided, the sector at the moment, and we work very closely with Bosch. They were paid by Bays, I think it was, to create the first hydrogen boiler. The technology to have a hydrogen boiler is there and it will work, but it's getting the hydrogen to the houses. And what we think is that the government has been very clear on that they want to push the electrification of low-grade heat, which is heat to heat your homes. That will be done through heat pumps, and then hydrogen will be kept back for the people that require basically to burn something to create those high temperatures, which is the industrial sector. I think you are going to get pockets of the UK which will roll out hydrogen. So the gas network are currently trying to adapt the pipework in the ground and get their network hydrogen ready, and I think that will happen, but it's going to be getting the hydrogen first. So places like Abadom that have large ports, ex-oil heavy areas are now converting to look at, building wind turbines, building electrolyzers to create hydrogen. And what I think you'll see is there will be pockets throughout the UK where hydrogen will be more readily available, and they will put it into the gas network and blend it into the gas network. There's already a plan to blend, I think it's make the gas a third hydrogen, which will bring down the carbon footprint of gas boilers without you having to replace your gas boiler. So I think hydrogen mix is coming, but whether we'll see a fuel hydrogen network in the next 10 years, we think it's very unlikely. And I know that Bosch and some of the other sort of Valent, those kind of companies aren't expecting hydrogen boilers ready for the home within the next 10 or 15 years, which presents this conundrum really, is everybody who's got a gas boiler now, you're not going to be allowed to replace it with a gas boiler. The funding's there to do a heat pump, so we think it's all going to go to heat pump. So yeah, again, I've got another whole webinar on that one, which I'll send you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. That's really much appreciated. Excellent. Any more questions? Okay.
What are you doing about storage of electricity?
Okay, about storage of electricity. We have a number of.
Sorry, essentially we're producing too much and you've nowhere to store it. So it's your wind turbines are turned off because they can't produce anymore.
Yeah. So, well, E.ON don't actually produce energy anymore. We've only got 2 power stations, which are biomass. Biomass power stations. We actually sold all our wind farms recently, but there is this problem that renewable energy, solar makes it during the day, and wind makes it when it's cold and it's wet and it's windy. So you've got this imbalance in the grid. So one of the things the grid is trying to do is obviously the storage of electricity. Now, we've done a number of projects. So we did one up in Newcastle called the electrification of heat, which we did with Bays, where we installed thermal stores into people's properties. So small units of what they call a phase change material. So it's like effectively a heat battery. Your question actually spans 2 sectors, both industrial and residential. On an industrial scale, there are large-scale batteries. We've installed a 10 megawatt battery at our power station at Blackburn Meadows, but batteries are expensive and they wear out pretty quickly. So to answer the question in the residential area, we think that heat batteries could be very useful. Smart homes will also allow us to be able to use that energy when it's more readily available and store it when it's not. So having solar PV with battery storage in the home, I think it's become a much more popular to be able to, store and during the day and release it in the evening between sort of 4 and 6 when the grid is at its most stressed. So more localized, smaller storage, heat storage and battery storage, I think is going to become more mainstream in social housing. And again, I think I've probably got some case studies we can send you of that, those kind of like pilot projects that we've been looking at.
I think that is the end.
Thank you, Alex.
So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure having your presence and taking some time out to listen to what we believe are key topics of discussion, whether it be within security, business agility, and within the housing sector. And we just really like to thank you. So thank you very much. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.